Dealings with the Dead, number 58. The late Archbishop of Bordeaux, when Bishop of Boston, Dr. Cheverus, told me that he had very little influence with his people in regard to their extravagance at funerals. It is very hard to persuade them to abate the tithe of a hare and the cost of a burial. I don't think that the dead are going to have any different of a time having a minimalist burial versus, burying a mansion with them. This post-mortuary profligacy, this pride of death, is confined to no age or nation of the world. It has prevailed ever since chaos was licked into shape, and throughout all heathendom and Christendom. Often the same thing, right? Begetting a childish and preposterous competition, who should bear off the corpses of their relations most showily, and cause them to rot most expensively. Sometimes it actually accelerates the burial, like all that stuff they do, the formaldehyde and all that, is the decomposition is more complete and quicker. It just keeps the flesh looking a bit nicer for the open casket. This amazing folly has often required and received the sumptuary curb of legislation. I have briefly referred in a former number to the restraining edicts of the lawgivers of Greece and the laws of the 12 tables at Rome. Even here and among the earlier records of our own country, evidences are not wanting that the attention of our worthy ancestors had been attracted to the subject of funeral extravagance. At a meeting held in Thuncule Hall, October 28, 1767, at which the Honorable James Otis was the moderator, the following resolution was passed, and we further agree strictly to adhere to the late regulations respecting funerals, and will not use any gloves, but what are manufactured here, nor produce any new garments upon such occasions, but what shall be absolutely necessary. This resolution was passed, inter alia similia, with reference to the Stamp Act of 1765. And as part of the system of non-importation, there is probably no place like England, no city like London for funeral parade and extravagance. The church, to use the fox-hunting phrase, must be in at the death, and how truly would a simple funeral without pageantry in some sort, a cold, unceremonious burial without mutes and streamers and feathers, without bell, book, or candle, flout and scandalize the gorgeous Church of England. The church and state are connected, so intimately and indissolubly connected, that he who dies in the arms of Mother Church must permit that particular old lady in the matter of his funeral to indulge her ruling passion for costly forms and ceremonies. And we find that the European Union, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, all have this goal of the reforming and the directing of the popular religion by the state. And extravagance in spending is one of its things that it definitely allows. It is more than 40 years since, with infinite delight, I first read that effusion, outpouring, splendid little eruption, if you like, of Walter Scott's called Llewellyn. Apart from all context, a single stanza is to my present purpose. I give it from memory, where it has clung for 40 years, when a prince to the fate of a peasant has yielded. Tapestry waves dark round the dim-lighted pall, with scutcheons of silver, the coffin is shielded, and pages stand mute in the canopied hall. Through the vault, at deep midnight, the torches are gleaming. In the proudly arched chapel, of banners are beaming. Far adown the long aisle, the sacred music is streaming, lamenting a chief, but the people should fall. And all this the nobility ape royalty, the gentry the nobility, the commonalty the gentry, and there is no estate so low as not in this particular to account the death of a near relative a perfect justification of extravagance. There is scarcely 1 in 1,000, I believe, who has any just idea of the amount annually lavished upon funerals in Great Britain, or of the extraordinary fact that joint stock burial companies exist there, and declare excellent dividends. In 1843, at the request of Her Majesty's principal Secretary of State for the Home Department, Edwin Chadwick, Esquire, drew up a report on the results of a special inquiry into the practice of interment in towns. Mr. Chadwick states that upon a moderate calculation, the sum annually expended in funeral expenses in England and Wales is 5 millions of pounds sterling, and that 4 of these millions may be justly set down as expended on the mere fopperies of death. Evelyn says that his mother requested his father on her deathbed to bestow upon the poor whatever he had designed for the expenses of her funeral. Speaking of this abominable misapplication of money, a writer in the London Quarterly Review, volume 73, page 466, exclaims, "To what does it go? To silk scarves and brass nails, feathers for the horses, kid gloves and gin for the mutes, white satin and black cloth for the worms? And whom does it benefit? Not those whose unfeigned sorrow makes them callous at the moment to its show, and almost to its mockery, not to the cold spectator who sees its dull magnificence give the lie to the preacher's equality of death, but the lowest of all hypocrites, a hired mourner, and so on. It is calculated by Mr. Chadwick that 60 euros to 100 euros, not euros, pounds, right? 60 pounds to 100 pounds are necessary to bury an upper tradesman, 250 for a gentleman, 500 to 1,500 pounds for a nobleman. So could a person be buried for $1 back then? High profits were obtained by the joint stock burial companies in England in 1843. The sale of graves in one cemetery was at a rate of 17,000 pounds per acre, and a calculation made for another gave 45,375 per acre. There's a cemetery that I've completely recorded. I guess there's new graves in there since I've last recorded in there, but their annual cost is something between those two figures, not including fees for monuments and so on. One company says that Mr. Chadwick has set forth an estimate that 7 acres at the rate of 10 coffins in one grave would accommodate 1,335,000 paupers. The following interrogatory was put and repeated by members of the parliamentary committee to the witnesses. Do you think there would be any objection to burying bodies with a certain quantity of thick lime, sufficient to destroy the coffin and the whole thing at a given time? Now, I would say that that doesn't have to be done, but the bodies decompose naturally and you can make room, right? In 1843, Mr. J.C. Loudon published in London his work on the managing of cemeteries and the improvement of churchyards. The cool, philosophic style in which Mr. Loudon handles this interesting subject is rather remarkable. On page 50, he explains as follows: this temporary cemetery may be merely a field rented on a 21 years lease of such an extent as to be filled with graves in 14 years. At the end of 7 years more, it may be reverted to the landlord and be cultivated, planted, or laid down in grass, or in any manner that may be thought proper. Nor does there appear to us any objection to union workhouses having a portion of their garden ground used as a cemetery, to be restored to cultivation after a sufficient time had elapsed. This certainly is doing the utilitarian thing with a vengeance, quite a novel rotation of crops, cabbages, following corpses. My long experience assures me that the rapidity of decomposition depends upon certain qualities in the subject, and in the soil skeletons are sometimes found in tolerably perfect conditions after an inhumation of 200 years. Perhaps Mr. London, in his eager festination for a crop, may have determined to bury in quicklime. Poppers and quicklime would make a capital compost, and scarcely require a top dressing of any kind for years. What beets, what carrots, for the cockney market. Notwithstanding the quicklime, I should rather fear an occasional development of some unlucky relic, in the guise of a lucky bone, a grinder perhaps, and when these vegetables shall again have been converted into animals, and these animals shall have served their day and generation, they shall be again converted into cabbages and carrots, as all their predecessors were, while this Mr. Loudon is a practical fellow, and his metastasis is admirable. Here are thousands of miserable wretches, nolorum, filii, many of them they have contributed scarcely anything to the common weal while living. Let us put them in the way, with the assistance of a little quicklime, of doing something for their fellow beings after they are dead. The popper squashes and cabbages must have been at a premium at Leadenhall Market. Imagination is clearly worth something. After all my reason can accord in the way of respect for these utilitarian notions, I solemnly protest against marrow fats cultivated in Mr. London's popper hotbeds. No doubt they would be larger, and the flavor richer and more peculiar, nevertheless. Mr. London must excuse me, I protest. He gives an alternative permission to lay down his mixture of dead bodies and quicklime to grass over the pasture of cows. Even then the milk would have a suspicious flavor or post-mortem smell, I apprehend. It would be the same thing by second intention, as the surgeons say. The explanation Mr. London's monstrous propositions can be found nowhere but in his concentrated interest in agriculture, to which he would have the living and the dead alike contribute. When contemplating the corpse of a portly pauper, he seems to think of nothing but the readiest mode of converting it into cabbages. I have heard of a tenacious fellow who had an irresistible fancy for skinning animals, and it had become a passion. Nothing came amiss to him. He sought with avidity for every four-footed and creeping thing that died within 5 miles of his dwelling for the pleasure of skinning it. The insides of his apartments were covered with the expanded skins, not only of beasts and of the lesser vermin, but of birds, serpents, and fishes. His house was an exuvial museum. He had a little son, a mere child, who assisted his father on these occasions. In a small way, he had the misfortune to lose his grandmother, a fine old lady, and the following brief colloquy occurred between the father and the child the day before she was buried. "I say, father." "What, Peter?" "When are you going to skin Granny?" And well, you kind of knew it was working up to that, right? And some people would like that, but, whether they would like their body preserved or something like that, you don't have to fulfill all of people's last wishes now, do you?